Lyanna Stark stood at the edge of the Winterfell courtyard, cloak pulled tight about her shoulders, head tilted back so she could see the first stars unveiling themselves in the purpling sky. She was not yet 20, but the fires in her eyes had burned for a lifetime. The great keep's old stones exhaled warmth that had soaked in all day, but the night air rising from the crypts was cold as death. A hush lay over the castle, yet beneath that hush, some restless stirring could be sensed in every corridor, in every stable, in every hall. Whispers had begun to coil through the north like creeping vines. Rumors of betrayal from King's Landing, talk of the Targaryen madness that would tear entire families apart if left unchecked. Lyanna felt the North's disquiet in the marrow of her bones. She'd woken that morning with a start, her fists clenched as if around some invisible sword. The memory of a dream lingered, a pale horse crossing a field of snow, and the smell of blood in the air. She could not recall more than that, but the dream haunted her. She suspected it would follow her until she made it real. She thought of her father and her brother Brandon, both taken, burnt or tortured for the Mad King's amusement. She thought of Ned, who by the grace of the Seven had only narrowly escaped the same fate, and who had carried their father's bones home in sorrow. The memory had hardened into ice behind Lyanna's ribs. Winterfell was not yet thickly blanketed in snow, but the smell of the oncoming winter was there. Servants had begun to stack firewood in tall piles, and rumors of an early frost had traveled from one small folk village to the next. The chill in the air matched the resolve forming within Lyanna's heart. She was no mere girl to dance at harvest feasts and quietly practice needlework. Since she was a child, she had loved the feeling of a blade in her hand, the brisk shock of the practice yard at dawn, and the howling of the deerwolves that roamed the forests near her family's seat. Her father, the late Lord Rickard Stark, had never known what to do with a daughter so willful. Brandon had always teased that Lyanna was born with a wolf spirit. In the days of her youth, that spirit manifested in harmless ways. A rebellious streak, a way of taming horses that only a few dared mount. But the events of the last year had changed her. The day the Mad King burnt her father alive, she felt a piece of her childhood had been scorched beyond any possible recovery. Now, under the moonlight, she reflected on the letter she had received earlier that day from Ned, who remained in the Vale of Arryn under the watchful eye of Jon Arryn himself. It was a letter thick with caution, urging her to remain patient, to remain safe, to remember that the Crown's wrath could be visited upon them at any moment. Ned wrote that if the Mad King ever discovered any sign of treason among the Stark siblings, no mercy would be granted. There were not enough men, he had warned, to mount a rebellion alone. The risk was too high, the prospect of defeat too certain. But Lyanna's blood seethed at these words. She did not blame Ned for his caution. He had watched their father die, helpless, powerless. Of course he would want to avoid a direct confrontation with King Aerys. And yet, Lyanna could not shake her anger, that righteous fury at the injustice that had been visited upon House Stark, upon the entire realm. Each new rumor from King's Landing brought fresh horrors. Small folk executed for suspected treason. Lords flayed or tortured if they dared speak against the Iron Throne. Something within Lyanna told her that time was running short and that she must act, not cower. She walked across the courtyard in small strides, the torchlight from the walls catching the proud lines of her face. Though she was slight in stature, there was a quickness and force to her presence that seemed to fill empty space. Her ladies and some loyal men of the North watched her with respectful wariness, for they sensed her mood and had seen enough to know that a storm brewed inside her. Lyanna paused at one of the archways, half hidden by shadow, and raised her gaze toward the highest tower, once used for ravens. A single silhouette stood there in the torch's glow, a Stark guard, clad in dark leathers, making his nightly round. She had instructed that all watchers remain vigilant. Though the king's men were far from Winterfell, the time might come when the Targaryen black and red banners would approach, coiling like a serpent around the city walls, ready to squeeze the life from the Stark lineage. She would not let that happen. At length, she turned from the courtyard and stole through a side door into one of Winterfell's lesser corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly in the long stone passage, where sconces cast flickering light and the scent of smoke hung in the air. She found her way through winding halls until she arrived at a small antechamber near the hall of the Great Keep. There, by the glow of a single candle, waited Roderick Castle and Barbary Dustin. Both looked up as Lyanna entered, and both bowed their heads in respect. She beckoned them to rise and closed the door behind her. Roderick was the son of Sir Courtenay Castle, a man who had faithfully served the Starks as master-at-arms for years before he died of a bad fall from a horse. Roderick had inherited his father's skill with a sword and that trademark castle loyalty. He had grown up alongside Lyanna, Brandon, and Ned, though always just a few steps behind, always an observer. Barbary Dustin, the Lady of Barrowton since her husband's passing, had known the stinging lash of Targaryen rule as well. Her younger brother had vanished during one of the Mad King's cruelties. No one knew exactly how or why, but rumors of a gruesome torture had reached her ears. Barbary had been hardened by grief, and there were times when her eyes glimmered with an unspoken vengeance. Lyanna regarded them carefully. Barbary was the first to speak, her voice a hushed urgency. "We must be careful, my lady. Word from the south travels quickly, and the Mad King's spies travel even faster. If we are discovered, it will be our end." Lyanna gave a single curt nod, then looked to Roderick. "I've summoned you both here to talk about that very risk, but I cannot abide this stasis. The Targaryens, this Mad King in particular, are a disease upon the realm. We must consider the North's best interest. If we continue to hide in our own shadows, waiting for him to devour us, we surrender our own power." Roderick's beard caught the candlelight in a rust-colored glow. "We have few swords, my lady. Even if all the North rose, we would face the Crown's armies, thousands of men from the Crownlands, the Reach, the Westerlands. The Targaryens have the strength of dragons behind them." Lyanna felt the ghost of a smile. "Dragons no longer fly above our skies. The last of them were caged, shriveled, or dead before my father's time. The greatest threat Aerys Targaryen wields now is fear. And fear is only as large as we allow it to grow. I understand we are outnumbered, but we are not friendless. The Vale would stand with us if Lord Arryn believed our cause was just. The Riverlands might come to our aid as well, if we can garner Lord Hoster Tully's goodwill. No single house can stand alone against the might of the Iron Throne. Certainly not House Stark, though we are proud. But if the Vale, the Riverlands, the North, and others stand united, the Crown will tremble." "Now." Barbary exhaled. "Tremble perhaps, but that's no guarantee of victory. The realm has been scarred by war more times than I can count, and each time we lose precious lives. You must be certain. You must be unyielding." Then. Lyanna nodded, lighting a second candle to banish the deeper shadows from the room. She let the flame flicker for a moment before speaking again. "We must be cautious, yes. But we cannot stand idle while the Mad King grows more unstable by the day. Already there is talk in the taverns of King's Landing that he hears voices in the walls, that he wonders if the entire realm conspires against him. That paranoia will only incite him to lash out further. Perhaps we can rally others by appealing to their sense of self-preservation. If we do nothing, they too might face the Crown's wrath, as we have." "And?" Roderick's eyes glimmered with a hint of that old castle zeal. "Then, we must begin to plan. We must build alliances quietly. Speak to the lords you trust. Make it known that if war comes, it will be for the sake of saving the realm from madness. If enough of us band together, we can isolate the king's power to the Crownlands. He cannot burn the entire kingdom if the entire kingdom stands united against him. Or so I would hope." "Done?" Lyanna's hands curled into fists at her sides, the memory of her father's torment spurring her onward. "We will not be alone. There's a reason that Robert Baratheon, Ned's friend from the Vale, once said that the North alone is half the kingdom by landmass. Let Aerys see what it means to threaten our families. We have ravens to send, alliances to forge, and we must proceed with all the subtlety of wolves stalking prey in the forest. Tonight is just the beginning." They spoke until the candle had almost burnt itself to the wick. Plans half-formed and half-whispered colored the air of that small chamber. Letters would be prepared and sealed in secret. Carriers would be chosen from among the most loyal men. oaths would be exchanged. Lyanna stressed patience and irony, given her own restless spirit, but she knew that the moment the crown suspected them, everything would unravel. By the time they were done, Roderick and Barbary both looked determined, albeit wary. As they bowed and left, Lyanna lingered alone, letting the tension coil within her chest like a serpent. When she finally stepped out into the corridor, she felt the cool draft from the crypts drift over her skin. She thought of her father's bones, now at rest in that cold, dark place. She silently promised him that she would neither forget nor forgive. House Stark would have its justice, but it would be on her terms. That night, Lyanna found it hard to sleep. Visions came to her in that half-waking realm. Her father's face twisted in pain, Brandon's last breath, Ned's anguished eyes as he recounted what he had witnessed. She saw the throne room in King's Landing, the Iron Throne rising like some monstrous beast of metal, and the Mad King perched upon it, eyes wide with mania. Then a swirl of images: snow, blood, ravens shrieking in a winter sky. She startled awake to find that dawn was breaking, pale light creeping through the shutters of her chamber. Taking a deep breath, she rose from her bed and dressed swiftly, choosing sturdy breeches and a simple tunic beneath her cloak. Though it was unorthodox for a highborn lady, she could hardly care for tradition these days. She pulled on a pair of boots meant for riding, braided her dark hair back from her face, and slipped out into the castle keep. At that early hour, servants scurried about with trays of bread and steaming cups of broth, their footsteps echoing on the worn stones. Lyanna made her way to the stables. She found her mare, Storm, a restless gray, with a fiery spirit that often matched her own. She led Storm out into the crisp morning air, ignoring the stable boy's concerned expression. She saddled the horse herself and mounted. In the yard, the few guards who were up at this hour inclined their heads at her approach but said nothing. She spurred Storm forward through the open gate, riding out onto the frost-hardened ground beyond Winterfell's walls. The land stretched wide around her, fields of brownish grass and distant patches of evergreens. The wind carried the faint tang of pine and the promise of the winter to come. A swirl of crows burst from a nearby tree as she galloped by. She breathed in deeply, feeling alive, feeling the edges of her determination sharpen against the cold air. She followed a narrow winding path through the trees, half familiar from her childhood rides. Eventually, she reached a small clearing that the Starks often used for archery practice or for hunts. There she slowed Storm to a walk and dismounted. In the silence that followed, Lyanna closed her eyes, letting the memory of Brandon's laughter fill her mind. He had taught her how to shoot an arrow in this very clearing. She remembered how he would correct her stance, how he would toss her quivers with a mischievous grin, how he would cheer when she sent an arrow streaking into the bullseye. Grief coiled around her heart, but she refused to let it weaken her. Instead, it filled her with a fierce conviction. She would not let Brandon's memory be a casualty of fear. She would not let her father's murder go unanswered. She would not wait for Ned to bring her tidings of caution while the crown extended its malignant reach further north. Aerys Targaryen had earned the wrath of the North, and if Lyanna had anything to say about it, he would come to know exactly how deeply that wrath could burn. She led Storm to a small brook that cut through the clearing so the mare could drink, then took a moment to kneel and dip her hand into the icy water. The cold burned, but she felt it bracing her mind. She glanced upward at the branches overhead, where the last leaves of autumn clung stubbornly. Then she looked west, imagining the sun's slow climb. Soon, the castle would be fully awake, and she had matters to attend to. Coded letters to send to Ned, to Robert Baratheon in the Stormlands, to perhaps even House Tully. The seeds of an uprising were best planted in quiet, away from prying eyes. She would not style herself as a queen or a conqueror, no. But she would ensure that the North had its rightful place in the realm's next age. And if it meant toppling a tyrant from his throne, so be it. When she finally returned to Winterfell, the courtyard was alive with activity. Stable boys hurried to and fro, the blacksmith's hammer rang out, and men-at-arms sparred in the practice yard. She dismounted and left Storm with a stable hand before heading toward the great hall, where breakfast was being served. She passed through corridors lined with carved direwolves, pass by guards who saluted in deference. It felt strange to her, still, that she was the Stark in charge. Ned was the rightful Lord of Winterfell by order of birth, but Ned was away. Brandon had been next in line, but Brandon was gone. Their father had entrusted Winterfell to them collectively, but with Ned's absence, it fell to her to maintain the household, to see that each man was accounted for, that each visitor was questioned and assessed. She braced herself with that knowledge. The Lord's seat in the great hall might have been too large for her slender frame, but she would fill it with her presence. Upon entering, she saw the tables adorned with platters of smoked fish, warm bread, boiled eggs, and honeyed oats. The hearth was lit, chasing away the morning chill. A few of the lesser lords and courtiers had gathered, among them Lord Manderley of White Harbor, who had arrived the previous evening. He was a tall, rotund man with a genial face that often broke into a broad smile. Yet when he turned to greet Lyanna, his expression was measured. Manderley was no fool, and he had heard the rumors swirling around the realm. Lyanna took her seat near the head of the table, nodding politely to those assembled. The talk was subdued at first. Mention of harvest yields, the condition of roads, the readiness of the watchtowers at the neck. Lord Manderley commented on the state of the White Knife's shipping lanes, which had seen fewer merchants of late. A consequence, perhaps, of the growing fear of the Crown's unpredictability. Lyanna absorbed these reports, letting her courtiers speak without interruption. They were concerned, and rightfully so. She could sense their unspoken question. Would the Starks do anything about the threat looming in King's Landing? At last, when a lull came in the conversation, she turned her attention to Lord Manderley. "My lord, I trust your journey here was safe." He dabbed his mouth with a napkin and cleared his throat. "Safe enough, my lady, though we passed fewer caravans than usual, and those we did see were heavily guarded. Men speak of brigands on the roads, but I suspect they are deserters from all corners, men fleeing something far worse. The realm grows uneasy." "Vannon." Lyanna inclined her head. "That is the word I hear as well." She did not elaborate, but she let her tone carry the weight of her thoughts. She could see the flicker of understanding in Manderley's eyes. A silent question about whether House Stark intended to act. She kept her mask carefully neutral. "I hope that in the coming days we can speak more about trade and security. The North must remain strong in these uncertain times. If you need anything, do not hesitate to ask." He smiled politely, though the corners of his mouth twitched in a half-grimace. "You are generous, my lady." Some of the men asked if they might go hawking later, or if they might walk the grounds, and Lyanna granted leave. As breakfast concluded, she noticed Barbary Dustin waiting near one of the side entrances. Barbary's eyes met hers, and Lyanna detected an urgency there. Nodding, she rose and excused herself, weaving among the departing courtiers until she reached Barbary, who beckoned her to a more private alcove off the main hall. In hushed tones, Barbary revealed that a raven had arrived from the Vale just that morning. "Word from Lord Arryn," she said softly, handing over the sealed parchment. "It's about your brother Ned, and about Robert Baratheon." Lyanna felt her heart skip at the mention of Ned. She took the scroll and broke the seal, eyes quickly scanning the cramped writing. Arryn's words were careful, but the gist was clear. Robert was uneasy with the Crown's increasing demands. Kyrres had required new levies from several major houses, citing some nebulous threat of treason. Baratheon's men were among those summoned to the Crownlands for additional training and mustering, and Robert was chafing under the orders. Lord Arryn, too, had expressed grave concern. He hinted that if the king continued on this course, there might be cause for the Vale to align with like-minded lords to protect their sovereignty. Lyanna read between the lines. The Vale might be open to forging a stronger alliance with the North against the Crown. Barbary watched Lyanna's face as she read. "This is an invitation of sorts," Barbary said. "Lord Arryn has always been close to Ned and Robert. Now that the realm grows unsteady, he looks to you, and to House Stark, for a sign. If we respond with too much enthusiasm, we risk being discovered. If we respond too tepidly, we risk losing his favor. We must tread carefully, my lady." Lyanna slowly rolled the parchment in her hands, her mind abuzz with possibilities. "I will draft a reply. Carefully. We must show that the North does not intend to remain idle. nor do we intend to launch a reckless rebellion that will destroy us all. But yes, we must let them know we are listening." She paused, eyes narrowing. "We will need to speak to Manderley as well, but we must keep this tight within our circle, until we can confirm who stands with us and who stands against us." Barbary nodded. "I will see to it." They parted then, each with a sense of purpose burning behind their eyes. Lyanna made her way through the keep, searching for a quiet place to compose a letter that would balance caution with boldness. Eventually, she found herself in the old solar, where a wide window overlooked the practice yards. Taking a seat at a small table, she unrolled a blank parchment, dipped a quill in ink, and began. "To the esteemed Lord Aaron of the Vale, your tidings and concerns are received with the gravity they warrant. Here in the north we have witnessed the unrest in the realm, and we share in your caution. We trust that your wisdom will guide you as it has guided so many over the years. Should the storms you foresee grow more violent, know that the north stands ready to weather them by your side, provided we see cause that unites our purpose." She continued in that vein, making certain to keep her words deliberately vague about explicit plans, yet suggestive enough to indicate her willingness to stand against the crown if necessary. She mentioned Ned's well-being, expressing her gratitude for Lord Aaron's continued guardianship and guidance of her brother. She finished with a flourish, carefully signing her name. Lyanna Stark, daughter of the North, sister to Ned Stark, keeper of Winterfell in his absence. "Now, nine?" She read it twice, ensuring it struck the right tone. A sense of satisfaction settled over her. This was the first real step in forging alliances that might challenge the Mad King's tyranny. Once sealed with the Stark Direwolf sigil, she would entrust it to one of her most loyal riders, a man named Matthias, known for his discretion and speed on the road. But as she blew gently on the ink to dry it, she heard footsteps behind her. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw Maester Lewin, his chain rattling softly as he bowed. "Pardon the intrusion, my lady," he said in a measured tone. "A raven arrived from King's Landing some time ago. I thought it best to bring the message directly to you." Lyanna's pulse quickened. She took the offered scroll, noticing the unmistakable Targaryen seal in dark red wax. Quickly, she broke it open. The script within was formal, commanding the presence of the lords of the great houses at King's Landing for a grand tournament to celebrate Prince Rhaegar's name day. The tone was polite enough on the surface, but Lyanna suspected the hand of the Mad King behind it. This would be an opportunity for him to keep his greatest lords within his sight, to measure their loyalties, or their disloyalties. A cold prickle ran along her spine. She recalled all too well what had happened the last time her family had gone to King's Landing in good faith. Brandon and Lord Rickard had never returned. Now, an invitation to a tournament felt like a ruse, a honeyed trap. Maester Lewin spoke softly. "Will you attend, my lady? They will note it if the Starks are absent." "Oh." Lyanna's jaw tightened. "They will note it, yes, but we cannot risk traveling to King's Landing, not with tensions so high. On the other hand, refusing might be seen as a provocation." Lewin nodded thoughtfully. "Might I advise sending a small retinue, a modest show of respect, if only to stave off suspicion?" She considered his words and nodded slowly. "A small retinue indeed, but I will not go personally. Let them think us cautious or even wary. That is not untrue. They cannot force us to play a game in which every piece is stacked against us." "Nan." Lewin's face twitched with concern. "My lady, rumors swirl about the realm. The king's hearing is said to be as sharp as a blade one moment, and as dull as a worn stone the next. These unpredictable tournaments often bring out the worst in him if he feels threatened. We should be prepared for whatever reaction our refusal might bring." Lyanna carefully rolled the parchment, considering. "I know." Her voice dropped an octave, bearing the heavy promise of House Stark's determination. "Let him rage. Let him prattle about dragons and traitors. The North will not kneel to madness. We will respond politely, but we will remain here. If they wish to call that treason, so be it. We are not an unarmed flock waiting for the butcher's knife." "No, Dani." Lewin inclined his head, though worry still darkened his eyes. "I shall make the preparations and deliver your response. May the old gods watch over us in these perilous times." He departed, leaving Lyanna alone again with the fading daylight filtering through the solar's window. She set aside the Targaryen scroll and returned to her letter to Lord Arryn. She carefully folded the parchment, pressed her seal into the hot wax, and let it cool. There was no turning back now. Each step she took would either secure the North's future or lead it further into a precarious dance with the Crown's wrath. Yet Lyanna felt a grim satisfaction. They had lived under the looming shadow of kings, landing for too long, driven by fear and haunted by memories of her father's and brother's cruel fate. She refused to let the Mad King's madness break her family a second time. Later that afternoon, when the sun had dipped low in the sky, she walked through the Godswood. Barefoot, she trod over the mossy ground, the ancient weirwood tree's carved face seeming to watch her with unblinking red eyes. The pool beneath reflected her image, a young woman with a proud, stark face, eyes swirling with quiet defiance. She lowered herself to her knees and let the hush of the Godswood envelop her. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant caw of a raven. Something about this sacred place made her feel closer to her ancestors, as if their spirits lingered among these old roots. She touched the damp earth and closed her eyes, recalling the old prayers her mother had taught her as a girl. She did not speak them aloud, but she let them echo in her mind, offering them to the old gods as a promise of what was to come. Rising, she brushed the dirt from her knees and looked up at the weirwood's face. A single red leaf drifted down, landing by her feet. She stared at it, a thought stirring in her chest. She would water this land with her own blood if she must, to protect House Stark and all those under her care. That was the burden of leadership, of duty, of the wolf's blood that ran hot in her veins. A short while later, she emerged from the Godswood, her resolve fortified. She found Roderick Castle in the courtyard, drilling a handful of younger men in swordsmanship. The rhythmic clang of steel on steel filled the cold air. Lyanna observed with a critical eye for several heartbeats, remembering her own lessons from years past. Then she approached Roderick and beckoned him aside, away from prying ears. "I'm sending a raven to Lord Arryn soon, and I have a message for Robert Baratheon as well. Would you see to it that my instructions are followed precisely, and choose the rider yourself?" Roderick gave a sharp nod. "Of course, my lady." She cast a glance at the recruits, noticing how unseasoned they looked. A pang tugged at her heart. Would these young men soon be called to fight in a war against the crown? The idea was both frightening and necessary in her eyes. War would be a horror, but living under the tyranny of a king who danced with madness was a horror, too, and not one she would stomach. She steadied herself. "Keep training them. They'll need to be ready for anything." Roderick's expression sobered, but determination shone in his eyes. "I will, my lady. The men will follow you, have no doubt." Lyanna paused, letting that simple statement sink into her. They would follow her? She, a daughter of House Stark, not a son. She was not the Lord of Winterfell, but in the eyes of the North, she was still a Stark. Duty and honor had fallen into her hands when tragedy struck. And if the men believed in her, then perhaps she was not alone in this uphill battle. She nodded at Roderick, a silent note of gratitude, and turned to go inside. The wind caught her cloak, pulling it close around her, and as she passed through the doorway that led back into the great keep, she caught sight of the sky, stained with the colors of an impending sunset, deep reds and bruised purples stretching across the horizon. The stillness of that moment felt portentous, as if the entire realm stood on the brink of an awakening, or a bloodletting. She made her way up the winding staircase to the room she had claimed as her own, the highest vantage in Winterfell, aside from the watchtowers. Through the narrow windows, she could see the wide expanse of the courtyard below, the ancient trees of the Godswood, and beyond the walls, the rolling fields that reached out toward the distant mountains. Clouds gathered there, heavy with the first snows of the season. Lyanna felt a tightness in her chest, an anticipation that thrummed through her veins. She wondered if the rest of the realm felt it too, this sense that something monumental was about to unfold, that the old order was cracking under the weight of a mad monarch's cruelty. She wondered about Prince Rhaegar. She remembered the rumors of his gentle soul, his love of music and prophecies. Yet she also remembered that he was a Targaryen, son to the Mad King, and rumors had a way of distorting truth. Did he willingly stand by his father's atrocities? Did he harbor doubts and regrets? She had no answers, only questions that circled her mind on restless wings. But if Rhaegar, or indeed any Targaryen, thought to quell the North's anger with polite gestures and forced marriages, they would soon learn how fiercely the wolf could bite. Lyanna's thoughts drifted to Ned, her dearest brother, who had tried to shield her from the darkest storms of the world. She could almost hear his gentle voice urging her to be careful, to think before she leapt. She loved him for his caution, but she would not be stilled. The memory of their father, her own sense of righteous fury, and her wolf-blooded spirit demanded action. She would forge alliances in secret if that was the only course. She would call upon the old ties between the North and the Riverlands, call upon the loyalty owed to her by lesser houses, and yes, she would stoke the fires of rebellion if there was no other recourse. For her family, for her people, for the future of the realm. The Mad King must be brought down before his madness devoured them all. Night descended slowly. The courtyards quieted as men took to the barracks or the hearths of their halls. Lyanna dined sparingly, her appetite dulled by tension, and excused herself early. In her room, she kept a single candle burning as she pored over the letters from the Vale and the cryptic messages from her small network of informants scattered through the Riverlands and along the neck. All signs seemed to point to a single truth. King Aerys was demanding more from his lords, pressing them to prove their loyalty through new tributes or direct attendance at court. Those who refused or hesitated found themselves the subjects of rumor and suspicion, often leading to arrests or brutal punishments. Time was of the essence. Long after midnight, Lyanna finally set aside her notes and moved to the small window. Winterfell lay silent, the sky overhead shimmering with countless stars. A waxing moon cast its pale light over the towers and walls. She rested her hands on the window ledge, eyes half-lidded, letting the cool air brush against her cheeks. For a moment, she remembered simpler days, galloping through the fields, horse races with her brothers, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchens, the songs she used to hum. There had been a time when she'd yearned for adventure, for something more than the quiet constraints of a lady's life. Now, she stood on the edge of a storm that threatened to reshape the entire realm. She tilted her head back, gazing at the moon. She wondered if Ned was looking at the same moon from the Vale, or if Robert Baratheon was perhaps cursing fate from his fortress in Storm's End. She wondered if the Mad King too stared at this moon with paranoid eyes, plotting some new cruelty. The realm had never felt so large and yet so connected by the threads of fear and ambition. She closed her eyes and let the hush of Winterfell cradle her for a moment. Tomorrow, she would dispatch her letters. Tomorrow, the seeds of rebellion would be nurtured. Tomorrow, she would take another step toward toppling the tyrant. When she finally turned away from the window, she felt the presence of her ancestors, the old kings in the north, whispering in her ear. Their presence was in her blood, urging her onward. She saw the faint reflection of herself in the pane of glass by the candlelight. A stark girl with a warrior's heart, determined to protect her home no matter the cost. She drew a long breath, letting her shoulders relax. Then she walked to her bedside, blew out the candle, and let the shadows of the night envelop her. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, a lone wolf howled, echoing across the courtyards and through the still air. Lyanna closed her eyes, took that sound into her lungs, and drifted into a restless sleep. Even in dreams, she would not forget her purpose. Let the Mad King tremble at the wolf's return. A storm was coming, and Lyanna Stark would be its herald. Okay. Lyanna opened her eyes to find the chamber still shrouded in half-darkness, the first pale threads of morning light barely creeping across the floorboards. The air felt colder than the night before, carrying a chill that seeped through the walls and under the door. She lay there a moment, one arm draped over her brow, listening to the hush within Winterfell. The shape of her dreams faded, leaving behind only a slight ache in her temples and the memory of wind howling outside the castle walls. She rose from bed with care, still half lost in the swirl of unspoken worries. When her bare feet touched the floor, she exhaled a trembling breath. The day would bring new demands, new decisions, and, if the gods were kind, the faintest glimmer of hope. She dressed simply, choosing dark breeches and a long tunic embroidered with the stark direwolf at the collar. Her boots were lined with fur, a necessity now that the winter chill was drawing near. The castle corridors were hushed at this hour, dimly lit by flickering torches spaced along the walls. She made her way down winding steps, passing a pair of guards who straightened as she approached. Each man inclined his head in respect but said nothing. They knew that these private morning hours were often hers alone. She walked with purpose, posture rigid from tension and sleepless nights. Outside, dawn was unfolding over the northern sky, with streaks of pink and gray. The courtyard felt emptier than usual. A handful of servants trudged by, carrying burlap sacks of grain from the granary. The blacksmith's forge still quiet, for it was too early to fire up the coals. Lyanna drew in the crisp air, letting it fill her lungs. She walked past the archery range toward a cluster of small outbuildings near the eastern wall. There, she found Matthias, the rider she had chosen to bear her letter to the Vale. He stood alongside his horse, a dappled chestnut mare, already tightening the straps of a well-worn saddle. At Lyanna's approach he bowed. "My lady, I was about to set off. The roads should be passable enough, though the weather in the mountains can turn foul quickly. I'll make haste." "Biden." She regarded him with careful eyes. He was a seasoned man in his 30s, wiry and tough from years spent as a scout. She knew he was discreet and had a knack for sensing danger on the roads before it found him. Silently, she handed him the sealed parchment. "Guard it with your life. Do not let it fall into the wrong hands." Matthias tucked it into an oilskin pouch inside his cloak. "I understand. Lord Aaron will have it before the next moon if all goes to plan." "Nin?" Lyanna nodded, stepping back as he mounted. She hesitated, then placed a hand on his horse's flank. "When you deliver this, linger a moment and see if you might learn anything of Robert Baratheon's own dispositions. If any letter or message is offered in return, bring it straight to me. Speak of it to no one else." He bowed once more, spurred his horse, and guided the mare out through the gates. Lyanna stood watching until the figure disappeared along the frost-rimmed road. In the stillness that followed, she caught sight of a raven perched high above on a watchtower's edge. Black feathers ruffled against the breeze. She felt a shiver run through her. The raven shifted, cocking its head as though listening for something. The faintest echo of foreboding settled in her chest. She turned back toward the heart of the castle, making her way to the great hall. Its heavy doors stood open, letting a swath of weaker sunlight spill across the stone floor. Inside, breakfast preparations had begun in earnest, though fewer courtiers and lords had risen than the day before. The remnants of last night's hearthfire still glowed with red embers, and servants bustled around with platters of boiled eggs, sausages, and spiced wine. Lyanna spotted Lady Barbary Dustin, seated near the main table, wrapped in a rich fur-trimmed cloak despite the interior warmth. Barbary looked up the moment Lyanna entered, and her expression told Lyanna all she needed to know. Something was amiss. Lyanna approached in measured steps, keeping her voice low. "My lady, you have the look of someone who's heard ill news. Has another raven come?" "And we done, sir." Barbary pressed her lips together, a sure sign of deep worry. "Not exactly, but a man arrived at dawn's first light. One of Lord Bolton's men from the Dreadfort. He carried word that the Boltons request an audience with you at their earliest convenience. He made it sound urgent." At the mention of House Bolton, Lyanna felt caution stir. The Boltons had a reputation older than memory itself, whispers of flaying, of sadistic traditions. Though those days were said to be long past, the tension between the Boltons and Starks was more than mere rumor. It had cooled over the decades into an uneasy alliance, but many in the north still cast suspicious glances at the pale banner with the flayed man. Yet House Stark could not afford to alienate them, especially now, when every possible ally might be needed. Lyanna asked, "Did he say what matter was so pressing?" Barbary shook her head. "Only that Lord Bolton wished to discuss certain happenings in King's Landing, and that he believes the North should be more vigilant than ever. He's invited you to visit the Dreadfort in a fortnight, or to receive him here if you prefer." "Nay, said." Lyanna tapped the table's edge with 2 fingers, her mind spinning. She suspected the Boltons smelled conflict on the wind and were hedging their bets. They were nothing if not opportunistic. If House Bolton felt the Mad King's power waning, they might align with the Starks to secure a favorable position in whatever new order emerged. But the reverse was also possible. If the Boltons believed the crown would crush any rebellion, they might betray the North to gain the king's favor. Every step had to be considered carefully. She turned to Barbary. "We cannot be seen traveling so soon?" It would draw unwanted attention, especially after sending word south. "Let us have Lord Bolton and a small party meet us here at Winterfell. We'll show him the courtesy of a proper welcome, but we'll be on our own ground, our own terms." Barbary leaned back slightly, nodding in agreement. "I'll see to the arrangements. When they arrive, we should keep a close watch on them." Bolton then moved quietly. Lyanna permitted herself a thin smile. "So do we. If they're coming to glean knowledge or sniff out potential treason, they'll learn only what I want them to learn." Her gaze flickered toward the hearth's smoldering embers. "We'll be prepared." She stayed only long enough to drink a cup of hot cider and nibble a bit of bread, then excused herself. Too many thoughts weighed on her. Too many plans demanded her attention. She walked briskly through corridors adorned with the tapestries of House Stark's victories in ages long past. Wolves triumphant in battles half forgotten. The threads of those stories seemed to call out to her, reminding her that Starks had faced worse foes than one Mad King. At each turn, she nodded to passing guards or house servants, mindful to appear calm. Let no one see the roiling sea of anxieties within. She made her way to a smaller solar beyond the Great Keep, a chamber where her father once discussed matters of state with his bannermen. It was quieter than the main halls, with a single narrow window that looked out over the training yard. Lyanna's breath caught for just a moment as she stepped inside, recalling how as a girl, she would press her ear to this very door to overhear Brandon's lessons with their father. That childlike memory felt distant now, unreachable across the gulf of tragedy that had changed her life forever. Roderick Castle was already there, standing at the window. When he turned to see her, she noticed he held a letter in his gloved hand. The broken seal displayed for her to see. It bore the Targaryen sigil. Her heart gave a painful leap. He inclined his head in greeting. "My lady, this arrived not an hour past, one of the ravens from King's Landing. It seems the king is pressing the lords of the realm to send more men for the rumored host he's assembling in the Crown Lands. The letter says the king will not take kindly to those who ignore his call." Lyanna accepted the parchment with careful hands and scanned the contents. The Mad King demanded levies, an additional 100 men from each major house, supposedly for the defense of the realm against imagined plots. He couched the request in formal language, but the underlying threat was plain. Those who failed to comply would be branded traitors. The madness in his words was palpable. He referenced the vile conspirators who would tear down the throne, though he named no specific traitors. Lyanna's lips parted in a silent fury. Perhaps the king was shoring up his defenses for the possibility of war. Perhaps he simply wished to test each house's willingness to obey. Either way, it was a direct challenge. She lowered the parchment and looked at Roderick. "He means to see if we'll bend. If we send men, we weaken ourselves. If we refuse, we risk immediate retribution. But winter is nearly upon us. Sending 100 men south will leave the north short-handed in the harshest months." Roderick's jaw tensed. "There's more. The men we send could be used as hostages as much as soldiers. The king can hold them in the Crown Lands. A reminder that any dissent here could cost the lives of our own men. It's a cunning move." Lyanna closed her eyes briefly, trying to master her anger before it spilled out. She recalled Ned's letter urging caution, urging her to avoid open defiance until alliances were firm. But the king's orders felt like iron chains tightening around her. At length she spoke. "We will send men, but not 100. We will claim that winter's approach demands we keep the bulk of our forces to protect our people. Let us gather a retinue, perhaps 20. Men we trust to observe and report on anything suspicious. We will frame it as a gesture of good faith, barely fulfilling his request while keeping the bulk of our strength here." Roderick considered it, then nodded slowly. "He may find it insulting, or he may see it as acceptable enough not to provoke immediate punishment. It's a gamble. Lyanna set the letter aside on a small table. All of this is a gamble, but we cannot expose ourselves fully. Not yet. And we cannot refuse outright. The time for that will come once we have the support to stand against him. A flicker of resolution burned behind her eyes. Would you select the men? Choose those who are disciplined and loyal. We need eyes and ears in the crown lands. Let them go under the guise of fulfilling the king's demand. Roderick bowed. You wish, my lady. I'll have them ready within the week. Away. When he left, Lyanna slumped into a wooden chair and buried her face in her hands for a moment. Each new edict from King's Landing felt like a stone dropped onto a precarious tower. How many more would it take before it all came crashing down? She wondered if Ned guessed how quickly the king's madness was growing, or if Robert Baratheon, that bold Stormlord, was quietly fuming in Storm's End, waiting for a sign that the North would join him in open rebellion. The puzzle pieces were there, scattered. Lyanna felt as though she stood at the center of a swirling storm, trying to catch them in midair and slot them into place before the wind tore them away. She recalled that the Boltons were sending an envoy soon. That might be an opportunity. House Bolton, if it threw its weight behind House Stark, would add thousands of men to any northern host. But could they be trusted not to turn coat if the crown offered them some twisted favor? There was only one way to find out: by meeting them on her own ground, reading their intentions in their words and gestures, and deciding if their thirst for power might be satisfied by overthrowing the Mad King, instead of siding with him. For now, that would be enough. She rose from the chair, brushed off the thoughts of doom, and went to see that the rest of her tasks were accomplished. The hours passed in a flurry of activity. Lyanna oversaw ration inventories, ensuring that with winter's encroaching presence, no villager would starve under her watch. She reviewed supply lists for blacksmith materials, for furs to line the men's armor, and for salt to preserve meats. Each detail was crucial, each one a potential bulwark against the hardships ahead. The routine tasks comforted her in a small way. They were normal, tangible, and part of the duties she had grown up observing her father perform. It was the deeper worry, rebellion, alliances, and the Mad King's wrath, that loomed like an ever-present shadow. By midday, she found herself in the practice yard, drawn by the sound of swords clashing. The sky had turned dull and gray, the promise of snow drifting on the wind. A ring of onlookers had formed near the far end of the yard, watching two swordsmen spar. One was a young man, barely past 18, wearing the Stark sigil on his tunic. The other was an older knight, with streaks of gray at his temples. Lyanna recognized him as Sir Devran, a sworn sword who had served her father. She approached quietly, arms crossed over her chest, curiosity piqued. The two combatants circled each other, blades flashing. The younger man tried a lunge, but Sir Devran parried and spun away, fluid as water. The watchers murmured in approval. Lyanna saw a flicker of frustration in the youth's eyes. He attempted another thrust, only to be sidestepped and tapped lightly on the shoulder by Devran's wooden practice blade. Sir Devran lowered his weapon and turned toward her with a faint smile. "My lady, I trust your day finds you well." She nodded. "Well enough. Carry on." She folded her hands behind her back and watched them resume. The younger man tried to keep his stance, but nerves were getting the better of him. Another flurry of motion, and Devran again managed to evade, this time disarming the youth with a deft twist of the wrist. The wooden sword clattered on the ground. Instead of shame, the lad looked determined. Meeting her gaze with a respectful nod, Lyanna felt a pang of admiration. He might be raw, but he was unafraid to fail publicly, which was a trait not easily found. She stepped forward. "You've spirit," she told him. "But spirit alone won't keep your sword in your hand. Take a breath between each move. Let your eyes follow his shoulders, not just his blade. Anticipate, don't just react." Then now. She crouched, picked up the training sword, and extended it back to him with a hint of a smile. He looked at her warily, as though uncertain whether she intended to demonstrate. She gestured for him to try again. This time, the young man steadied himself, exhaled, and raised his sword. Sir Devran offered a mock salute, and they began once more. Lyanna noted a visible improvement. The youth paced himself, watched Ivrin's shoulders, and managed to block at least one strong swing. Watching this, she felt the stir of pride. The North was often underestimated by those who lived in warmer lands. They assumed Northerners were crude or slow. But these men, these people, had a resilience born of harsh winters and centuries of standing against the cold. They would not be easy to break. She let them finish without further interference, and walked away as a smattering of applause greeted the end of the sparring match. Afternoon darkened into a gray dusk, and snow began drifting from the heavens in light, lazy flakes. By the time Lyanna reached the gates to check on a newly arrived supply wagon from Deepwood Moat, the courtyard was dusted with white. The wagon creaked to a halt, and a pair of guards helped the driver unload barrels of salted fish, casks of ale, and bundles of thick wool. Lyanna stepped forward to greet the driver, a middle-aged woman with strong arms and a warm smile. They exchanged pleasantries. She was from a village near the coast and brought news of roiling seas that had delayed their journey. She also relayed rumors from the local taverns. Soldiers loyal to the crown had been seen traveling north, albeit in small numbers, perhaps to keep an eye on the roads and report any gatherings of rebellious intent. Lyanna's brow furrowed. "Where did you see them?" "Around the crossroads near Moat Cailin, my lady," the driver said, wiping her brow even though the air was cold. "Didn't seem like a large party, but they asked questions. Wanted to know who was traveling, where they were headed, whether they carried letters. We stayed quiet, told them we were just poor fisherfolk bringing wares to Winterfell." She gave a nervous laugh. "They let us be, eventually." Lyanna offered a coin for the driver's troubles, then oversaw the storage of the supplies inside Winterfell stores. The news gnawed at her. If Crown loyalists were already sniffing around the neck, they might harass her messenger on the way to the Vale. But she had chosen Matthias for exactly that risk. He was cunning enough to slip past suspicions. Still, the presence of Targaryen scouts in the north was not a welcome sign. Twilight set in fully as she made her way back to the Great Hall for the evening meal. Servants had lit the torches along the walls, lending a flickering warmth to the cold stone corridors. The hall was livelier now, with men and women gathered around long tables sharing mulled wine and thick stew. Lyanna took her seat quietly, acknowledging the respectful nods of those around her. Lord Manderley had remained in Winterfell another night, citing the snow and a desire for further conversation with Lyanna about trade. She spied him across the hall, conversing with Barbary Dustin. He lifted a cup in her direction, and she dipped her head in response, forcing a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Though she ate some bread and stew, her appetite was faint. Each bite felt like a chore. She listened to the low roar of conversation around her, mundane talk of hunts and harvest, but also whispered rumors of the king's latest demands. The tension in the air was almost tangible, like the hush before a thunderstorm. She found herself longing for simpler times, but those were gone forever. When she finished, she excused herself, leaving the warmth of the hall behind. Barbary Dustin followed her out into the corridor, catching up with a whisper of her skirts against the stone. "My lady," she said softly, "I worry about Lord Manderley. He's pressing me for details on your stance regarding the king's call for levies. He wants to know how many men you plan to send." I gave him the standard answer, but he seemed dissatisfied. Lyanna's lips thinned. Manderley is proud, and he prides himself on being the most powerful lord under the Starks. He'll want to ensure he isn't caught unaware if we move against the crown. Barbary's gaze flickered. He might also be looking to protect White Harbor's interests, even if that means siding with the crown if he thinks we'll lose. We must be mindful. Lyanna's sigh was heavy. I'll speak with him personally. Perhaps I can assure him of our intentions without revealing too much. He may still prove loyal if he believes the rest of the realm is on the brink of rebellion. She placed a hand lightly on Barbary's arm. Thank you for keeping watch. They parted ways, and Lyanna ascended a flight of steps leading to a small gallery overlooking the main courtyard. The wind cut across her cheeks when she opened the door to step outside. From this vantage, she could see the entire expanse of Winterfell's walls and rooftops dusted with white. Snow glimmered in the torchlight, and she watched guards pace along the battlements, their shapes little more than silhouettes in the gloom. She stood there, breathing the cold air, sorting her thoughts about Lord Manderley, about the potential arrival of Lord Bolton, about how to balance caution and ambition. Her reverie was broken by the distant ring of the castle's warning bell. It tolled once, and then again, its deep notes echoing across the snowy courtyard. A jolt shot through her. Winterfell was rarely disturbed at this hour, especially not by the watch signal. She rushed inside, descending the steps as quickly as she could without stumbling, heartbeat thrumming in her ears. By the time she reached the courtyard, she saw a cluster of guards gathering near the main gate, torches flaring bright in the gloom. The heavy portal stood ajar, letting in gusts of frozen wind and swirling snow. Peering over the shoulders of the men, she saw a figure stumbling forward, half collapsed it seemed, into the arms of the gate guards. Roderick Castle was already there, shouting orders. "Fetch Maester Lewin, quickly, and get this man inside, see to his horse if it's still out there." The guards sprang to obey. Lyanna pushed through the gathering men, kneeling to see the newcomer's face. Snow clung to him in thick patches, and he shivered violently. Beneath the frost, his cloak was stained dark with something that looked like blood. Lyanna leaned closer. "Who is he?" Roderick glanced at her. "One of the men from White Harbor, I believe. I recognize the sigil on his cloak. Gods, he's in a bad way." Maester Lewin arrived a moment later, kneeling to assess the man's injuries. The victim's eyes fluttered open, flicking across the crowd until they landed on Lyanna. His lips moved, but no sound emerged at first. Then, in a rasping whisper, he croaked. "They attacked on the road, near the last river. Targaryen men. They wore black armor. Red dragons." Lyanna felt ice slip down her spine. She exchanged a glance with Roderick. Lewin tried to steady the man, pressing a hand to a wound on his side that bled sluggishly. The man gasped, forcing more words out. "They asked who we served, accused us of treason. We tried to fight, but..." He lapsed into ragged coughing. Blood flecked his lips. Lewin signaled for the guards to lift him gently. "All of you, stand back," the maester barked. "We need to get him warm and tend his wounds. Help me carry him to the infirmary." The guards carried the wounded man inside, leaving Lyanna and Roderick behind, the wind still biting at their faces. Lyanna stood momentarily transfixed by the sight of blood staining the snow in dark patches. That was the color of the crown's madness, seeping into the north. She closed her eyes against the shock of it, then turned to Roderick, voice tight with urgency. "Spread the word. Double the sentries along the roads leading from the south. I want watchers at every pass that leads into the north, Moat Cailin, the White Knife Crossing, everywhere. We cannot let these attacks go unchecked." Roderick bowed, already signaling to the guards. Lyanna kept her cloak wrapped around her, though she barely felt the cold anymore. She stared at the blood in the snow, wondering if this was only the beginning of a far greater confrontation. Targaryen men in black armor, roving the roads, questioning travelers about their loyalties. It reeked of paranoia, of a crown desperate to root out imagined enemies before they could rise. The king was tightening his grip on the realm, strangling every corner of Westeros in the name of stamping out rebellion. But that iron fist might only succeed in forging the alliances Lyanna needed. House Stark could endure many hardships, but it could not stand idle while the Mad King's men shed northern blood on northern soil. She made her way indoors, trailing snow from her boots. Servants hurried past, carrying extra braziers and bed linens for the wounded man. She followed them at a distance, knowing that Maester Lewin would do what he could. There might be more survivors, or more casualties. She realized with a sinking heart, if the Targaryen soldiers had cut off routes in or out of the north, how many more would suffer? A quiet rage simmered beneath her breast. Something had to be done. But first, she needed more information. She sought out Lewin in the infirmary, but he was too busy tending the man's wounds to answer more than a few quick questions. The injured messenger was too weak to say much, though he had mumbled that his party had been traveling from White Harbor toward Winterfell. Lyanna gleaned that they might have intended to deliver word of Manderley's negotiations, or to discuss some new trade matter. Then the Targaryen men had descended, demanding to know who they served. The man had tried to shield his companion's intentions, but the soldiers had not believed him. Most of his group had been slain. He alone escaped, riding wounded for hours through the gathering snow. Lyanna lingered a moment, watching Lewin mix a poultice and press it to the man's side. His groans of pain lanced her heart. A guard appeared at the door, asked if she needed anything. She merely shook her head and stepped out into the corridor. Outside the infirmary, her hands curled into fists. The Mad King's campaign of fear had come to the north with sharpened steel. She could no longer entertain half measures or purely passive caution. She found Barbary Dustin waiting in the hall, pacing. "Is he likely to survive?" Barbary asked softly. Lyanna rubbed her temples. "I don't know. Maester Lewin does all he can, but his injuries are severe." Barbary exhaled. "Then the rumors are true. Targaryen men are scouting the north, as if preparing for open war." "We'll have to prepare," Lyanna finished. "Yes, more than prepare. We must decide how and when to move." Barbary lowered her voice. "If the king's men grow bolder, they might ride straight to Winterfell. What then? Are we ready to repel them? Or do we feign compliance?" "Namayak." Lyanna's gaze hardened. "We'll do both. If they come under a banner of parley, we'll greet them with courtesy. If they come in force, we'll meet them with steel. I won't let King Aerys spill blood in my courtyard the way he spilled it in King's Landing. This is the north. He won't find us as easy prey." Barbary studied her with an inscrutable expression, then nodded. "You do your father proud." The words were offered without flourish, but they meant much coming from Barbary, who had long harbored her own grief and grudges. Then she stepped back, glancing down the corridor. "I'll see to the guards' rotation. If the Boltons arrive soon, we should be ready. No doubt they'll want to discuss these attacks. It may be the very reason they asked for an audience in the first place." Barbary left, and Lyanna stood in the flickering torchlight, grappling with the enormity of what lay ahead. The Mad King's paranoia was no longer a distant rumor. It was right here on their roads, threatening travelers, killing innocents, all for the sake of rooting out the faintest whiff of rebellion. She thought of her father and brother once more, how they had gone to King's Landing in a spirit of loyalty, only to be met with fire and chains. She would not repeat that mistake. If war was coming, she would not face it with her eyes closed. A swirl of memories flooded her, her father's voice reminding her to be cautious yet honorable. Brandon's laughter when they practiced swordplay under the watchful eye of the old kings of Winterfell. She blinked against the sting in her eyes, feeling the weight of their legacy rest on her shoulders. Yet it was no heavier than the truth she already carried. House Stark had endured for millennia by bending when it must, but never breaking, never bowing to tyranny. She would see them endure still. Night deepened. Lyanna retreated to the library tower, where old tomes and scrolls lined the shelves. She lit a single candle at a desk in the corner, the flame dancing in the slightest draft. She needed to think, to plan her next steps. She recalled the coded letter she had drafted for Lord Arryn, which Matthias carried now. Perhaps word would come back soon confirming that House Arryn and House Baratheon were ready to move against the crown. Perhaps not. In any case, the North had to fortify its own position. She began to sketch out the names of potential allies. House Manderly, House Serwyn, House Umber, House Glover, House Mormont. Each house had strengths and vulnerabilities. The Umbers, with their massive fortress at Last Hearth, might stand as a bulwark to any crown forces approaching from the east. Mormont had fewer men, but their women were as fierce as their men, and Bear Island had an unyielding pride. Glover could safeguard the western coasts from raids. She wrote quickly, quill scratching the parchment. In the silence, she could almost hear the old library walls breathing, as if the ghosts of generations past stood with her in the flickering light. How often had she run through these halls as a child, carefree and wild? Now each step felt weighted with destiny. She paused to massage the cramp in her writing hand, eyes drifting over the shelves. There were histories of the North, chronicles of the Long Night, tales of how the kings in the North once fought back the White Walkers. Legends or truths, it did not matter. What mattered was the spirit they embodied, the knowledge that the North could unite under a common threat and survive. They had done so countless times in centuries past, they would do so again. She resumed writing, outlining a secret muster plan for each loyal bannerman, urging them to discreetly rally more swords without raising the king's suspicions. Perhaps this meant calling for additional farmhands or huntsmen in the name of preparing for winter. But beneath that excuse lay the seeds of an uprising. If the crown decided to bring war to the north, they would find themselves in a labyrinth of defensive positions, ambushes, and fierce hearts unwilling to bow. Lyanna's quill moved relentlessly, spinning out contingencies for supply lines, rationing, fallback positions in case the crown's armies advanced deeper into northern territory. The more she wrote, the steadier her resolve became. A knock on the library door broke her concentration. In the hush, the knock sounded like a thunderclap. She set down her quill and called out for the visitor to enter. The door creaked open, revealing Maester Lewin, his chain glinting in the candlelight. The lines on his face were etched with worry, and the faint smell of medicinal herbs clung to his robes. She stood. "How does he fare?" Lewin exhaled. "I've done all I can. He's stable for now, but the fever is high. If he makes it through the night, he might survive." He was able to say a bit more once he was warmed, though speaking tired him quickly. Lyanna stepped around the desk, folding her arms. "Tell me." Lewin cleared his throat. "He claims their party was overtaken by perhaps a half-dozen men-at-arms bearing Targaryen colors. They did not openly say they were sent by the king, but the leader mentioned orders from a higher authority. They demanded to see each traveler's letters or sealed documents. When they found references to White Harbor's dealings with Winterfell, they accused them of conspiring with traitors. Then accused that they were searching specifically for any sign of collusion." Lyanna felt her stomach twist. They're targeting the Starks already. The king must suspect we're forging alliances. Or at least he suspects that if there is rebellion to be found, it will come from the north. "Inna." Lewin's face was grave. "You must be aware, my lady, that traveling south will only grow more dangerous. And we can expect more of these incidents on the roads. If you plan to gather allies, you must do so very carefully." Lyanna's eyes flicked to the parchment on the desk. "We'll have to rely on coded letters and trusted messengers for now. Face-to-face councils might be too risky unless we can arrange them discreetly within our own territory. Perhaps we can bring the northern houses to Winterfell under the pretense of a winter gathering." "Mamps." Lewin inclined his head. "That could work. People travel to Winterfell in winter for shelter and food. It would not raise as many alarms if many lords assembled here." She looked at him earnestly. "Thank you for your counsel, Maester, and for tending to the wounded man. If he recovers, let me know as soon as he's able to speak more." When Lewin left, Lyanna returned to the desk. She paced a moment, then drew a fresh sheet of parchment and began drafting an invitation to the major houses of the north. An invitation cloaked as a call to gather for the impending winter. The harvest was done, the days grew ever shorter, and the season of ice would soon be upon them. It was not unusual for the Lord of Winterfell to invite his bannermen to discuss supply arrangements and the defense of key roads during the long, dark months. No one outside the north would find this surprising. Inside the north, each lord might guess there was more afoot, but that was precisely the point. Let them come. Let them see the direction the winds were blowing. She wrote swiftly. "To the loyal lords and ladies of the north, winter has come early this year, and with it, challenges for us all. As your warden and protector, I call upon your house to join me at Winterfell, that we may share our provisions, our wisdom, and our kinship in these trying times. Let this be a council of preparation, so that no man, woman, or child shall go hungry or unguarded in the season to come." She avoided any direct mention of the crown or potential unrest, but the subtext was clear for those with eyes to read it. Gather, fortify, stand together. She concluded with the Stark seal. Set the parchment aside to dry, then plan to have multiple copies made. Let the ravens fly. Let the north converge upon Winterfell under the banner of tradition. They would stand as one, or they would fail separately. She hoped each house had enough memory of old loyalties to answer the call. Her candle guttered low, dripping hot wax onto the wooden holder. She realized how many hours must have passed, how the night crept ever closer to dawn. She felt exhaustion tugging at her, The burdens of leadership weighed on her with every letter written, every strategy formed. Yet a quiet determination pulsed beneath that weariness. The knowledge that she was doing all she could to protect her family's legacy. Finally, she doused the candle and left the library, carrying her notes with her. The corridor was nearly empty, save for a single guard stationed at the far end, who offered a tired salute. Lyanna moved like a ghost through the corridors until she reached her chamber. Inside, the fireplace had been stoked by the servants, casting a warm glow. She set the rolled parchments on a small chest, then went to the window. Looking out at the courtyard, the swirling snow, and the silhouettes of watchmen on the walls. Winterfell was never entirely dark. There was always a torch, a lantern, a fire, keeping back the night. It was that small, stubborn spark of light that soothed her in times like these. She unfastened her cloak, draping it over a chair, and let herself sink onto the bed. Her body ached with fatigue, but her mind still raced. She thought of the wounded messenger, of his pained whisper about Targaryen soldiers in black and red. She thought of the roads patrolled by men loyal to a king who knew only cruelty. She thought of Ned in the Vale, Robert in the Stormlands, the faint lines of alliance being drawn in secret. Most of all, she thought of the North, her home, her pride, the land she would not surrender to madness. If the Mad King wanted to stamp out rebellion, he would have to face the wolves in their den. And that, she vowed, would be no easy victory for him. As she lay there, eyes drifting shut, she remembered the sound of a single wolf's howl, echoing through the night on evenings past. That lone, mournful call had once made her heart race with the thrill of the wild. Now it resonated differently, a cry that seemed to say the time had come to defend the pack. Lyanna breathed deeply, letting the warmth of the fire soak into her bones. She did not know what the next day would bring. More ravens, more news of atrocities, or perhaps the arrival of Lord Bolton's retinue with their pale banners. But she knew her course and would not waver. Sleep closed in slowly, step by step, and she welcomed it as one welcomes an uncertain Ollie, cautious yet in need. In her final waking moments, she recalled how the wind had sounded against the castle walls. Winter was here indeed, but House Stark had always thrived under the howling wind and the bitter cold. If war came to their doorstep, it would find them ready to bear their fangs. And if Lyanna had any say, the Mad King would soon learn that the North was not to be trifled with. The flicker of that thought carried her into the depths of slumber, with the promise of a new dawn waiting to test her resolve yet again. Ka. Lyanna woke to the muffled rustle of movement in the corridors outside her chamber, the telltale scuff of boots on stone. For a moment, she lay still, letting her eyes adjust to the morning light seeping through the shuttered windows. She could tell at once that the fire had burned low, for the room was cool, her breath fogging faintly in the beam of light. She pushed aside the blankets, stood, and pressed her palms against the gooseflesh on her arms, warding off a shiver. Winter's whisper had only grown stronger during the night. As she dressed, she heard a knock at her door. 2 short raps, followed by a pause, then one more. That was Roderick's pattern, a sign that he came with urgent news. She swallowed her trepidation and opened the door to find him in the corridor, his brow creased with worry. He carried a small scroll in one hand, the wax seal broken. Behind him stood a guard bearing the black direwolf crest on his cloak. Roderick inclined his head. "My lady, you should see this at once." It arrived at first light. Lyanna beckoned him inside, though she felt a surge of dread at the prospect of more letters from King's Landing or ill tidings from the roads. Roderick shut the door behind him and extended the scroll. The wax bore the imprint of House Aaron's falcon. Lyanna's pulse fluttered. She unfolded the parchment and swiftly read its contents. Ned was well. That was her first relief. The note, written in John Aaron's careful hand, confirmed that Ned continued to train and serve in the Vale's garrison, largely safe from the king's direct wrath. But overshadowing that relief was another message. Robert Baratheon had quarreled openly with envoys from the crown, refusing to submit a fresh levy of men on short notice. There had been a confrontation. Though no swords were drawn, the tension was explosive. Jon Arryn reported that Robert now hid his anger behind jests and laughter, but only barely. If a spark came along at the wrong moment, the Stormlands might just ignite. Jon Arryn's words were measured but clear. The realm stands on a knife's edge, and the crown is watching us all. Aerys might march on any lord who defies him if the balance tips. We must weigh each move carefully. The letter ended with a subtle hint that if the North faced crown aggression, the Vale would stand for justice. For now, though, the Vale counseled patience, a soft warning not to provoke the crown prematurely. Lyanna set the parchment aside, inhaling slowly. Robert nearly sparked a riot. She murmured. Or so this letter suggests. He's restless. If the crown keeps pressing him, he might do something rash. Roderick scratched at the stubble along his jaw. That's not unexpected. Robert is known for his temper. Yet it's good to know that Lord Arryn still favors us, even if he urges caution. Lyanna nodded, folding the letter again. He acknowledges our position, but begs we not move too soon. It seems we're all trying to judge the moment when the king's madness becomes too grave to ignore. She pressed her lips together and glanced at the guard standing silent near the door. Any other tidings this morning? The guard cleared his throat. None from beyond the walls, my lady. But inside, well, the wounded man from White Harbor is still alive, if just barely. He raves in his fever, mentions Targaryen men, brandishing some kind of royal warrant. He paused, uncertain how much to share. I've heard some of the younger lads worried that the crown might send a larger force north to search our roads. Lyanna sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Let them worry, but let them stay vigilant. Our watchers must not let Targaryen forces slip past unnoticed. If they attempt to come this far north in numbers, we'll have ample warning. She then gestured for Roderick to follow her out into the corridor. I'll break my fast in the great hall. We can speak further there. They descended the stairs together, the guard trailing behind, and emerged into the wide corridor that led to the main hall. Braziers burned, warding off some of the morning's chill. Servants hurried by with baskets of bread and jugs of water. As Lyanna passed, she noted their bowed heads, the anxious lines in their faces. Winterfell's mood was tense in a way she hadn't witnessed before. Even the older retainers, men and women who had weathered countless winters, seemed on edge. In the hall, breakfast had been laid out. Oatcakes, boiled eggs, and warm cider. Several lords and ladies who had stayed in Winterfell overnight lingered at the tables, speaking in murmurs. She spotted Barbary Dustin seated next to Lord Manderly, each wearing polite smiles that did not extend to their eyes. Lyanna crossed to them, taking a place at the head of the table. Manderly rose briefly, inclining his head. My lady D'Artagnan, I trust you slept well despite the howling wind. He cast a quick glance toward Roderick, as if assessing whether there was news. Lyanna forced a cordial tone. The wind is always a companion here, Lord Manderly. It comforts as much as it warns us. I trust you found a warm hearth. He gestured to his ample girth with a mild chuckle. I did indeed. The chambers in Winterfell are not as spacious as those in White Harbor, but they keep the cold at bay well enough. I must leave soon, though. My people will be expecting me back. Not been pain. She broke a piece of bread and dipped it in honey, stalling, deciding how much to reveal. I appreciate your visit. I hope you'll bring our best wishes to your folk. We rely on White Harbor's trade now more than ever. News from the southern roads grows troubling. Manderly's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Indeed. I hear disturbing tales. The crown is suspicious of any who travel northward, or so they say. I wonder, my lady, do you have any notion why the crown's attention should be so fixed on these parts? We have always been loyal to the throne, have we not? Lyanna met his gaze without flinching. She sensed the hint of accusation in his words. He wanted to see if House Stark was stirring rebellion. If the rumors of her father's murder had left the Starks hungry for vengeance. She chose her words carefully. The North has no love for Aerys Targaryen's cruelty, my lord. Everyone knows what befell my father and brother. Yet we have made no open move against him. If the king suspects we are a threat, that is his own paranoia speaking. Manderly pursed his lips, nodding slowly as though weighing her answer. Beside him, Barbary Dustin slid her gaze between them, watchful. At length, Manderley spoke with a conciliatory smile. I see. Then perhaps we must do our utmost to reassure the crown that our trade and loyalty endure, so long as they do not threaten our livelihood. A wise king would see the benefit of keeping the North content. There it was. The subtle hint that if the crown continued to provoke, House Manderley might shift its alliances. Lyanna heard it clearly. A wise king indeed. Let us hope King Aerys finds the wisdom to leave the North in peace. She could almost taste the irony in her words. Aerys Targaryen wise. She doubted that very much. Manderley made to stand, bowing with a flourish. If you'll excuse me, my lady, I'll prepare to depart. With your leave, we'll head out before the snow thickens. He paused, voice low. If there's aught you'd have me convey back to White Harbor, discreetly of course. Pray tell me now. Lyanna considered, then shook her head. Only that we watch the roads with caution. I may call for a gathering of bannermen soon, once winter's grip tightens. I trust White Harbor will send representation. Das der. Manderley dipped his head in assent. Of course, the Manderleys have ever been loyal to Winterfell. Your father knew that, and so should you. He left the table, followed by a few attendants, leaving Lyanna with Barbary. She released a soft sigh and reached for her cup of cider. Barbary studied her with a faint smile. You handled him well. He was fishing for signs of open rebellion, but you gave him none. Lyanna leaned in close, voice hushed. He suspects. They all suspect. But I can't appear to confirm anything until I know the rest of the North stands with us. If Manderley senses that we're isolated, he might advise White Harbor to remain loyal to the Iron Throne. We need him watching the situation, uncertain which side to choose, so that when the time comes, he'll hedge in our favor. Nein small. Barbary's eyes glinted in admiration. Perhaps your father never intended you to be a master of politics, but you've learned quickly. Lyanna mustered a rueful grin. I had no choice. War shapes us in ways we don't expect. Tell me, how soon might we expect the Boltons to arrive? Staining. Barbary crossed her arms. Their rider said a fortnight, but with the roads uncertain, they might come sooner or later than that. We must be prepared. The Boltons rarely travel without pomp, a display of force, so I expect a column of men to appear at our gates. Lyanna nodded and glanced at Roderick, who had lingered in the background. Make sure our watchers on the walls know the Boltons may arrive with many men. They're to be treated courteously, but we won't let them swarm Winterfell unchecked. Keep them in sight. Roderick bowed. As you wish, my lady. She finished the meager remains of her breakfast, all too aware of the swirl of tension in the hall. Some of the lesser lords who had gathered were whispering among themselves, likely about the wounded man, the rumored Targaryen soldiers, and the subtle friction of Manderley's departure. Lyanna excused herself, feeling the press of eyes on her. Once in the corridor, she paused to draw steadier breath. The day had only just begun, and already she felt the weight of decisions piling up like snowfall. She made her way to the infirmary, stepping around servants carrying clean bandages. The tang of herbs and stale blood hung in the air. Maester Luwin greeted her with a grim nod, leading her to the small cot where the wounded messenger lay. The man's face was deathly pale, his lips chapped, but he was conscious. A bandage bound his torso, stained with fresh blotches of dark red. He breathed shallowly, eyes flicking to Lyanna as she approached. He tried to push himself upright, but she shook her head. Lie still. You've lost a great deal of blood. I won't keep you long. She took a seat at his bedside, speaking gently. Can you tell me more about the attack? He swallowed, wincing. We rode from White Harbor with a small caravan. We meant to bring supplies here and to speak on Lord Manderley's behalf about trade for the winter. He grimaced, as if the memory pained him more than his wound. When we were halfway through the King's Road that skirts the last river, these men appeared. 6 or 7, all in black, each with a red dragon stitched on the breast. They demanded to see our documents. When they saw the mention of White Harbor and Winterfell, they called it treason, said the Starks were plotting against the crown. We tried to reason with them, but they grew violent. Man, Lyanna's jaw tensed. Did they say who commanded them? Were they acting under direct orders from the king or from someone else? He shook his head, eyes glossy from fever. They did not say. But the leader, he bore an emblem on his cloak. Some variation of the Targaryen sigil, though with a gilded border. He spoke with a knight's authority, said we would be taken to King's Landing for questioning. I escaped only because one of our men cut a path for me. He died to buy me time. The man's breath shuddered. I rode until my horse collapsed. Then I walked until I found help. She set a hand gently on his arm. You're brave for bringing warning. I promise you this, your sacrifice will not be in vain. We will see that those men do not terrorize northern roads without consequence. He offered a weak nod, tears pricking the corners of his eyes at the thought of his fallen companions. Maester Leuven stepped closer, his expression urging Lyanna not to push the man too far. She stood, letting the messenger lie back. Rest now. My thanks go with you. As she stepped away, Lewin walked her to the infirmary door. He's improving slowly. If the fever breaks, I believe he'll live, though the wound is severe. He may never wield a sword again. Lyanna's mouth pressed into a thin line. We're sure he's cared for. His courage saved us from stumbling blindly into Targaryen patrols. Inform me at once if he remembers anything else. Lewin nodded, and Lyanna left, her mood darkened further by the messenger's account. So the king's men were not simply patrolling. They were explicitly hunting for signs of conspiracy between White Harbor and Winterfell. As she walked the corridor, she thought of Ned's cautioning words. Perhaps the crown had gleaned enough rumors to guess that the North might stand against Aerys if pushed too far. Perhaps the king's mania was driving him to lash out preemptively. Either way, each new piece of news spelled deeper trouble. She went to the great library tower again, that refuge of dusty tomes and quiet gloom. A few bright candles still burned from the night before. She took a seat at the desk where she'd penned her letters, rubbing her hands together against the chill. The plan to summon the North's lords to Winterfell under the guise of a winter council might need to happen sooner rather than later. If Targaryen scouts continued to harass travelers, it was only a matter of time before blood was shed on a larger scale. The North had to prepare a united front. Leaning forward, she began drafting new copies of the invitation she intended to send out. She adjusted the language slightly, adding a note that rumored bandits she avoided naming Targaryens outright had been sighted on the King's Road. The North needed to fortify its commerce and supply lines in time for the harsh weather. This was all true in its own way, if incomplete. Let the lords read between the lines. The crisp sound of her quill scratching on parchment reverberated in the quiet. Occasionally, she paused to dip her pen or stretch her fingers. She wrote swiftly, trusting that her father's memory would guide her. He had taught her to be precise and thorough, even in urgent times. She had finished half a dozen letters when a page boy appeared at the door, clearing his throat quietly. My lady, Ser Devron, is asking after you. He's in the training yard with some men. She set down her quill and stood. Thank you. Tell him I'll come at once. Descending the library stairs, she stepped into the courtyard, where the snow had accumulated in a thin sheet, crunching beneath her boots. The wind whipped her cloak around her ankles. She saw Ser Devron, bareheaded despite the cold, giving instruction to a trio of younger fighters. He caught sight of her and bowed, gesturing for the men to take a brief respite. My lady, he said, stamping his feet to loosen the snow. I've been drilling the men you selected for the Cromlein's retinue. They're decent enough, but a few need more training if they're to act as your eyes and ears rather than just foot soldiers. I wondered if you wish to inspect them yourself before they depart. She glanced at the small cluster. They were among the more reliable men in Winterfell's forces. 2 older soldiers who had seen a few skirmishes in the past, and 1 younger man with sharp instincts. They stood at attention now, eyeing her with mingled respect and curiosity. She nodded at Ser Devron, then addressed the men directly. You all know why we send you south. The king demands troops, though we can scarce afford to spare any. You go to represent our fealty, yet also to protect our interest. If you find yourselves pressed by the crown for more men, or if you see cruelty inflicted on innocents, you must send word home. Do not act rashly. Stay observant. The realm is on a razor's edge. She paused, meeting their eyes in turn. Be discreet. Tell no one that I ordered you to gather information. Speak only of fulfilling your duty to the king. The older soldier, a man named Gareth, stepped forward, resting his hand lightly on the pommel of his sword. We understand, my lady. But what if we're questioned about our loyalty? If these Targaryen men are as suspicious as rumor says, we might be taken for traitors. Lyanna's expression hardened. Then you do as custom dictates. Bow your head, swear your loyalty to the realm, and hold your tongue. If they press for more, yield no details about Winterfell's internal affairs. Your duty is to survive, to learn what you can about the crown's movements, and to return on that knowledge. The king has not declared open war on us yet. Use his own laws to your advantage. Gareth looked slightly reassured. The younger soldier, Marin, if she recalled correctly, glanced at his companions. We'll do it, my lady. We'll not fail you. She nodded once. A silent benediction. Ser Devron clapped Gareth on the back, then turned to her. They leave on the morrow if that suits you. The roads may worsen if we delay. Very well, Lyanna agreed. I have letters of compliance with the king's command prepared, naming these men as our contribution to the crown's muster. That should satisfy any gatekeepers on the journey south. She paused, letting a thin smile cross her lips. May the old gods guide your steps. She dismissed them, watching as they trooped off to pack their gear. A part of her regretted sending even these few men, but better to have eyes in King's Landing than to be blind. The entire realm was an elaborate chessboard now, and each piece had to be placed just so. She turned to Ser Devron. You've done well training them. Keep watch on the rest of our forces. We'll need every able body if things escalate. He dipped his head. As you command, my lady. She left the yard, feeling the day slip into a dreary lull. Snow fell in a sparse drifting veil. The sky hung heavy and gray, the sun hidden behind thick clouds. Winter was arriving in earnest. She recalled a childhood lesson. Once the snows came, the North's defenses doubled simply by nature's design. Southern armies dreaded the deep cold, the treacherous ice. If King Aerys did decide on a northern campaign, he might discover that the climate itself would wage war against him. Back inside, she continued her day's work, forging letters, hearing minor petitions from villagers, consulting with Barbary Dustin about provisioning. The hours slipped away. She retired briefly for a midday meal, but her appetite was meager. By late afternoon, she found herself in the great hall once more, standing near the dais, when a new commotion arose at the entrance. A guard hurried inside, calling her name. She strode across the hall to meet him. He spoke between breaths. Another rider approaches from the south, bearing no visible sigil. But he's clearly wounded. We see blood on his cloak. Her stomach lurched. Again? She mustered her composure. Bring him in, quickly. Moments later, the heavy doors opened, and the rider stumbled in, supported by two of Winterfell's guards. Snow and mud caked his boots, and a half-frozen trickle of blood stained his left arm. Despite the grime and the exhaustion on his face, Lyanna recognized him. Matthias, the messenger she had sent to the Vale with a letter for Lord Aaron. She rushed forward, heart pounding. Maester Luwin. Someone fetch him quickly. Kneeling beside Matthias, she gently eased him to the floor, ignoring the spreading wet from his cloak. What happened? Matthias coughed, spitting out a thin trail of blood. Ambushed. Near the neck. Not Targaryen men, I think. Might have been mercenaries or bandits. Took my horse, my supplies. He winced as the guards tried to remove his cloak. But I got away. Had to walk through the swamps, avoided the main roads. My lady, I have something for you. Lyanna gestured for the guards to be gentle. Easy now, don't strain yourself. He fumbled inside his cloak, producing a small oilskin-wrapped object. Lyanna carefully took it from him, unwrapping it to reveal a folded piece of parchment sealed with Jon Arryn's falcon. Relief flooded her. At least the message was still intact. Maester Luwin hurried over, kneeling to examine Matthias's wounds. Matthias gritted his teeth. It was them or me. Had to fight my way clear. His eyes flickered with weariness. Didn't let them see that letter. They wouldn't have known its value anyway. I'm sorry. I couldn't come sooner. Lyanna placed a hand on his shoulder. You did well. You've done the North a great service. Rest now. Maester Lewin will tend to you. The guards helped lift him, and Lyanna could see the jagged slash across his arm. A wound that must have bled for hours. She clenched her jaw, silently swearing to punish these raids, these acts of violence multiplying across the roads. With a nod from Lewin, the guards bore Matthias away to the infirmary. Lyanna stood there, heart pounding, staring at the letter in her hands. She closed her eyes briefly, before heading to a more private alcove near the dais. Roderick and Barbary both approached, their concern evident. Lyanna held up the parchment. He came from the Vale. Let's see what Lord Arryn has to say. They formed a small circle, and Lyanna broke the seal. By the torchlight, she read the words carefully. At first, she saw references to Ned. He was safe, though the situation in the Vale was growing uneasy. Then she read further. Robert Baratheon had left the Vale, traveling back to Storm's End in haste. Something about the Crown's renewed call for levies had enraged him, and rumor had it he was rallying men in secret. Jon Arryn wrote that the king's latest demands were so extreme. Certain lords had begun whispering about open revolt. The letter ended with a grim warning. Aerys has sent more agents north, searching for any sign of collusion. Take care. Storm clouds gather on the horizon. Lyanna lowered the parchment, her voice quiet but urgent. It's as we feared. The king grows bolder in his paranoia. Robert is on the brink of open defiance, which will surely draw the king's wrath. If the crown suspects we're in league with him. She let the thought trail off. They all knew what that would mean. A savage strike against House Stark, just as he had done to Rickard and Brandon. Roderick exhaled. So the question is, do we stand with Robert if he calls his banners? Or do we wait until the crown forces our hand? Barbary interjected, her tone crisp with the hint of a challenge. Waiting too long might mean letting the crown pick us off one by one. If Robert and others unite first, the North could lose its chance to shape the conflict. That said, if Robert moves prematurely and is crushed, we'll be next. Not. Lyanna held the parchment in trembling fingers. She recalled Robert's boisterous laughter, his brashness when he visited Winterfell years ago with Ned. She knew him to be a formidable warrior, but also headstrong. If he acted on impulse, the realm would be plunged into chaos sooner than any of them planned. At length, she drew a breath. We keep to our path. Summon the northern lords to Winterfell under pretense of a council for winter preparations. We forge unity here. If Robert calls for aid, we decide then, as a united North, how to answer. Then, whoa. They all nodded in grim agreement. Lyanna gathered the letter to her chest, mind racing. Send ravens to the lords I named last night. The letters are prepared, sealed with the Stark sigil. Let them be dispatched at once. Barbary and Roderick bowed, stepping away to carry out her orders. Lyanna stood alone for a moment, glancing around the hall. Servants were cleaning the floor where Matthias' blood had dripped, scrubbing away the scarlet stain. The memory of it made her chest tight. How many more good men would spill their life's blood in these halls or on the roads? All for the sake of alliances and subterfuge. Tucking Jon Arryn's letter into her belt, she walked swiftly into the corridor, where a chill breeze drifted through the arrow slits. She headed toward a small chamber that overlooked the courtyard, a place she sometimes used for private conversation. There she shut the door, lighting a single lamp. She needed a moment to think, to plan, to be away from the bustle. The lamp's yellow glow flickered against the stone walls, magnifying her own silhouette. She unrolled the letter once more, rereading it. The lines about Robert seething in Storm's End felt like an omen. The Targaryen agents on the road, the king's demands for men, all of it was building toward a confrontation that might engulf the entire realm. She paced the length of the chamber, recalling how Ned used to scold Robert's impulsiveness. Perhaps Ned, from the Vale, could restrain him, or at least temper his fury. But the letter implied Robert had already departed. He might be rousing the Stormlands into a war frenzy. The door creaked open, and Roderick stepped in quietly. "My lady, the ravens are being readied. They'll fly before nightfall." Lyanna nodded. "Good." She paused, meeting his gaze. You know, if the king's men discover our letters, or if a single lord betrays us, then we're lost, he finished. But we have little choice. If we do nothing, the king will pick at us until there's nothing left. She managed a tired smile. Yes. At least we'll face him on our own terms, not cowering. The North deserves better than cowering. She thought of the father she had lost, the brother she would never see again, and her other brother far away. We have to make this count. Roderick inclined his head, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. The men speak of you as a wolf with iron in her spine, my lady. We'll follow where you lead. He left, leaving her with that small testament of faith. She blew out a breath, feeling the tension coil in her stomach. Sometimes she wondered if she was making decisions too quickly, if she was truly prepared to lead men into a potential war. But each hesitation reminded her of Brandon's screams, of the pyre that claimed her father. She would not stand idle and hope the king's madness passed. Night came swiftly, the sky darkening into a thick swirl of clouds. By the time Lyanna ventured back into the courtyard, a swirl of snow had drifted across the stones, forming white lumps at the edges. Torches burned along the walls, casting flickering shadows. She spotted the shapes of ravens launching from the rookery tower, silhouettes against the gloom. The notes of a howling wind reached her ears, and she lifted her head to feel the sting of icy flakes on her cheeks. The gates opened briefly to let Lord Manderley's party depart, their horses snorting in protest at the cold. Lyanna stood on the steps leading up to the great keep, watching as Manderley waved a last farewell. She dipped her head slightly in return. She wondered if he would reflect on their conversation, on the wounded travelers, on the possibility that the Starks were silently gathering power. She hoped the seeds of doubt she had sown would bloom in his mind. Let him weigh the crown's demands against the loyalty house Manderley had pledged to Winterfell. Once the party was gone and the gates shut, Lyanna turned to see Barbary Dustin approaching with measured steps. Arms crossed against the cold, they fell into stride together, heading inside. I made sure those letters went to all the major houses, Barbary said, voice pitched low. Some lesser lords too. We don't want them feeling excluded in case we need every sword. Lyanna nodded. Good. Now we wait for replies. We must be prepared to host them in Winterfell soon. On the surface for supply concerns, but beneath that, to discuss the threat of the crown. Let them see that we are not alone, that the entire North stands together if forced. Mendersund. Barbary cast her a sidelong glance. What of the Boltons? Their arrival might coincide with the others. That could lead to friction. True, Lyanna acknowledged. We'll have to manage that carefully. If we're in open conference with the Boltons, many lords will watch to see how we handle them. Some despise the Boltons still. But if the Boltons pledge themselves to our cause, that unity might send a powerful message. If they refuse, well... She let the thought hang in the cold air. A fracturing in the North would be catastrophic, but she wouldn't let House Bolton sabotage their efforts. They entered the keep, warmth licking at their cheeks. Barbary stopped at the foot of a staircase leading to her own chambers. I'll see to the details. Good night, my lady. Good night, Lyanna replied, then continued down the corridor alone. She found a quiet sense of relief in the deserted halls. Most souls had sought their beds or huddled near fireplaces. A single candle still lit the corridor near her room, flickering shadows across the walls. She placed a hand against the rough stone, feeling that ancient solidity beneath her fingers. Winterfell was old, older than the Targaryen dynasty, older than half the histories in the library. It had withstood storms, invasions, kings, and pretenders. She clung to that thought, drawing strength from the knowledge that the fortress itself bore silent witness to her resolve. Inside her chamber, she shed her cloak and boots, then sank onto the edge of the bed. A faint draft seeped around the window shutters, but the fire in the hearth offered a soft glow. She held Jon Arryn's letter once more, reading it in that dim light until the words blurred. The realm stands on a knife's edge. The phrase echoed in her mind. She thought of Ned, wondering if he'd also sensed how precarious everything was. She whispered a silent hope that he would remain safe in the Vale, far from the king's madness, until the moment was right. Another day gone, another day closer to the uncertain storm. Before blowing out the small bedside candle, she gazed at the tiny flame dancing upon the wick, remembering how fleeting even the brightest lights could be when faced with the cold. Then she extinguished it, letting darkness cloak the room. She lay down, pulling the furs over her, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind drifted to the memory of her father's voice and Brandon's laughter, and she resolved once again that she would not let their deaths remain unanswered. At last, she drifted into restless dreams. She dreamt of wolves prowling the snowy forests beyond Winterfell, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. In her dream, she followed them barefoot across ice and branches, hearing their howls reverberate through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, the shadow of a dragon loomed over the treetops, breathing not fire but a chill wind that froze the leaves to glass. She could feel the wolves pressing close, a protective circle around her. Then the scene shifted into images of men in black and red armor, torches raised, searching the night for prey. She heard the clang of swords, the cries of terror, and woke with a gasp, sweat cold on her brow. She lay there in the dark, heart thudding. Outside, the wind moaned. She listened to the hush of Winterfell, that ancient silence filling the spaces between the walls. In that moment, she felt how lonely it was to bear this burden. She wished Ned were beside her to share the weight. But she pushed the thought away, summoning the flinty resolve that had kept her going. She would do what needed to be done to protect her people and rid the realm of the Mad King's shadow. The next day arrived with a bitter wind rattling the shutters. Snow had thickened overnight, blanketing the castle courtyard in white. Lyanna rose early, pulled on a thick cloak, and made her rounds. She inspected the storerooms, checked in with the blacksmith, spoke briefly with the stable master about how many horses were fit for winter travel. Every detail mattered now. The men destined for the Crownland's retinue departed just after dawn, boots crunching in the snow as they passed beneath Winterfell's gate. Lyanna stood atop the battlements, watching them go. A solemn pride filled her, mingled with worry. They vanished down the winding road, half lost in the swirling drifts. By mid-morning, a series of ravens arrived, each bearing short replies from some of the lesser houses nearest to Winterfell. Serwyn, Tallheart, and others. They accepted her invitation for the Winter Council. She felt a jolt of satisfaction reading their courteous words. How Serwyn in particular expressed keen interest in the new developments. Lyanna suspected that meant they had also noticed an increase in suspicious travelers on the roads. Perhaps they too sensed the Crown's presence creeping northward. She penned quick acknowledgments, sealing them with wax. The cawing of ravens filled the rookery as her messages flew out again. She continued her day with the resolute calm she had learned to maintain. Meeting with household staff, ensuring each person knew their responsibilities for hosting a larger number of guests soon. Casks of ale and mead had to be brought up from the cellars, extra quarters readied for the lords and their retinues. Through it all, the memory of the wounded men, the rumors of Targaryen patrols, and the letters from Jon Arryn coursed through her mind. They were the silent impetus behind every step she took. Toward midday, a flurry of excitement rippled through the courtyard. A small group of riders from House Glover had arrived unexpectedly, bearing news from Deepwood Motte. Lyanna hurried to greet them near the great gates, accompanied by Barbary Dustin and several guards. The leader of the group, a tall woman with braided hair and the Glover sigil on her cloak, dismounted, bowing stiffly. "My Lady Stark," she began, wiping snow from her brow. "I'm Dorna Glover, cousin to Lord Glover. I bring word that House Glover received your summons. My lord is preparing to travel here for your council. He bids me come ahead to ask if the roads are safe." Lyanna approached, offering a hand in greeting. "Lady Dorna, you are welcome at Winterfell. The roads are uncertain, to say the least. We've had reports of suspicious activity, though not all are confirmed. We'll escort Lord Glover safely if he chooses to come." Dorna nodded. "That is good to hear. My lord suspects the king's men may be scouring the realm for signs of disloyalty. He fears the men of Deepwood Motte could be called upon to fight in a war not of our choosing. He hopes to discuss this face to face with you." "Nah." Lyanna's gaze flickered with understanding. She gestured toward the castle interior. "Come, warm yourself and your people. We'll talk further in the Great Hall." They led the newcomers inside, shaking off snow in the entryway. Servants guided the Glover riders to stables and guest quarters, leaving Dorna with Lyanna and Barbary. As they traversed the halls, Dorna spoke of how House Glover had noticed an unusual influx of traveling merchants, men who asked too many questions about local loyalties. Glover's scouts had also reported glimpses of black-clad figures at the edge of the Wolf's Wood, though no direct confrontation had taken place. The rumors all pointed to the same conclusion. The Crown was planting watchers in the north, hoping to catch any whiff of rebellion. In the great hall, they settled by a roaring fire. Dorna accepted a cup of hot cider, sipping gratefully. Lyanna took a moment to study her face. The woman's eyes were shadowed, as though she hadn't slept well. She wore a stoic expression that gave little away, but Lyanna sensed fear lurking beneath. "When Lord Glover arrives," Lyanna said, "we'll speak of how best to handle these intrusions. The king tests our strength, but the north is no stranger to adversity." Dorna's features softened briefly. "Aye, the old gods watch over us. My cousin will be grateful to know you take these matters seriously." Menerso. They spoke a little longer, agreeing on a date by which Lord Glover expected to reach Winterfell. Lyanna assured Dorna that the roads near Winterfell would be patrolled by Stark men to deter bandits or Targaryen agents. Once that was settled, Dorna excused herself to rest from her journey. Lyanna remained in the great hall, pacing before the fire, lost in thought. The more visitors arrived, the more certain she became that the north sensed an impending storm, one that might sweep away the illusions of peace. She was still there, gazing into the flames, when Roderick came to inform her that the day's business was winding down. Darkness crept past the windows, the snow continuing to fall lightly. After ensuring that the evening meal would be provided for the Glover party, Lyanna retired to the same small solar she had claimed for private matters. To her mild surprise, Barbary was already inside, standing near the window where a single lamp cast a soft glow. Barbary turned, her face grim. "We've just gotten word from the watchtower at the White Knife. One of our scouts reports seeing a party of crown men on the eastern road, possibly heading for White Harbor or skirting it. Small in number, but heavily armed." "No." Lyanna's pulse quickened. "Do they ride under a royal banner?" Barbary shrugged. "The scout only caught a glimpse. He said they carried a dragon standard, but it was half concealed. They might be traveling to White Harbor for official reasons, or they might be searching for more traitors, as they call them." Lyanna closed her eyes. "Manderley just left us this morning. If that Targaryen party intersects with his group, there could be trouble, unless Manderley chooses to bend the knee and let them pass." "Manus." Barbary's expression hardened. "We can do nothing but wait for word of what transpires. This is the shape of the coming winter, Lyanna. A realm full of watchers, each suspicious of the next." Lyanna pressed her hand against the window's cold glass, peering into the darkness beyond Winterfell's walls. "So be it. We'll watch in our turn. The king's men can roam the roads, but the north is vast. Let them try to pin us down. They'll learn how quickly we can vanish into the snows." "Nuptimor." Barbary gave a grim nod. "And if they attack White Harbor itself?" Lyanna's jaw tightened. "Then House Stark will not stand idle." She paused, forcing a calm tone. "But I suspect the Crown won't move openly against White Harbor without provocation. They likely intend to intimidate or glean information. House Manderley has a reputation for wealth and a large fleet after all." Barbary released a breath, half laughing in weary exasperation. "We are walking a thin line, aren't we?" Lyanna nodded slowly. "Yes. But I will not let fear hold us in place. Aerys Targaryen has shown us what he is. A tyrant who kills first and asks questions later. We can't yield, not now." "No." They parted with somber expressions. Lyanna lingered a while, letting the hush of the solar soothe her tangled thoughts. Eventually, she made her way back to her chamber, passing servants who were lighting wall torches for the night. The corridor outside her door was cool and quiet, the stone floors reflecting the faint glow of the flames. She heard the distant rumble of the wind pressing against the castle walls, rattling wooden shutters. Inside, she found a simple meal waiting. A bowl of stew, a chunk of bread, and a cup of hot mulled wine. She sank into her chair and sipped the wine, letting the spiced heat course through her. Outside her window, the night stretched endless, pinned with a few faint stars. She wondered if Ned ever looked at those same stars from the Vale, if Robert stared at them from Storm's End, each grappling with the unfolding crisis in his own way. The stew tasted of venison and roots, a hearty flavor that reminded her of hunts with Brandon. She ate mechanically, barely noting each bite. When she finished, she stood and walked to the window. She pushed it open a crack despite the chill, letting a swirl of frosty air brush her cheeks. Far below, she could see the courtyard blanketed in white, torches flickering like fireflies. She inhaled, tasting snow on the wind, and listened for any sign of wolves in the distance. The hush of winter night carried no howls, at least not yet. Maybe the wolves, too, were waiting for the moment to strike. She closed the shutter, latched it, and turned to stoke the fire in her hearth. Flames leapt higher, casting dancing shadows across the walls. She settled onto the bed, letting the day's fatigue weigh on her bones. Her thoughts roamed over the tasks yet undone, welcoming the northern lords, forging alliances, bracing for the Boltons, watching for signs that Robert had raised his banners. All the while, the king's shadow loomed from the south like a dark cloud. She did not bother undressing fully, only kicked off her boots and slid beneath the heavy furs. She kept the small bedside lamp lit, too keyed up to embrace darkness. For a long time she lay there, staring at the ceiling, imagining the shape of the future. In her mind's eye, she saw an impossible tangle of roads leading to distant corners of Westeros. Some roads leading to liberation, others to ruin. Slowly, her eyelids grew heavy, and she sank into a half-sleep, drifting in and out of hazy dreams. She dreamt again of wolves, but this time, she stood among them as an equal, their golden eyes reflecting her own face. The forest was silent and laden with snow. She could feel their breath in the cold air. Far off, a single bell tolled, low and ominous. She couldn't tell whether it called her forward or warned her away. The wolves raised their heads in unison, hackles bristling. Then the dream splintered, and she fell into deeper oblivion. Morning arrived with a bruised sky, swirling gray and dull purple. Yet the sun did not quite pierce the clouds. Lyanna awoke, stiff and tired, feeling as though she had barely rested. The lamp had burned out sometime in the night, leaving only the faint glow of the hearth's embers to greet her. She rose, combed her hair roughly, and left to begin another day's watch over the fragile peace. A swirl of new tasks awaited her. Checking on the messenger Matthias, who was slowly recovering in the infirmary, and ensuring the Glover riders had what they needed until Lord Glover arrived. She also planned to consult with the steward about the best lodging arrangements for all the expected guests, including the Boltons. Each duty felt like a stepping stone laid across a rushing river. She dared not look too far ahead, lest she stumble. As she made her rounds, the corridors buzzed with subdued talk of Targaryen soldiers and the uncertain roads. She tried to offer reassurance where she could, keeping her back straight, her voice firm. If fear took hold of her people, the crown's intimidation would gain a foothold. Better to maintain an aura of calm resolve, even if her own heart pounded with doubts. By midday, she stood again by the castle gates, looking beyond at the snow-draped expanse. A guard informed her that no new travelers had been seen that morning. The hush of winter had settled like a blanket. Lyanna gripped the cold stone of the battlements, scanning the horizon. When the north began to move, it would move slowly, like a glacier, implacable, unstoppable. She had to trust in that truth. She turned to descend the steps, footsteps echoing in the stillness. Inside, warmth radiated from torchlit corridors and hearths. She paused near the great hall, hearing the muffled laughter of a handful of guests who had found momentary relief in hot cider and conversation. The sound felt oddly distant to her. She longed for simpler days, but knew they were gone. The time for decisive action drew nearer with each Targaryen move. She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat. She thought again of Ned, hoping that when the hour came, he would stand beside her, forging the future of the North and the realm as one. For now, she walked forward alone, a daughter of House Stark bearing a wolf spirit, ready to defy a tyrant's madness. The cold winter winds might batter her, and the king's men might skulk about in black armor. But she would not cower. She would gather her bannermen, rally the north, and if the gods granted her strength, she would make the mad king pay for every horror he had unleashed. Let the south tremble at that quiet storm gathering behind Winterfell's walls. Lyanna Stark had chosen her path, and she would see it through to the bitter or triumphant end.